That Nat King Cole played such a harsh piano. Good morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. I have a notice. Mrs. Busby, by the way. Mrs. Busby is the other half of the Viewpoint staff, besides our console manager and producer and engineer, Mr. James Ash. I came to... the other fellow is just a doddering old fellow trying to figure out how to get along in the mid-90s and figure out where he is each day. I thought we'd do a good thing for the community this morning. Just leave politicians out of the conversation.
That's pretty hard to do.
I'm getting pretty jaded with them, and as are most of our voters, I think. Anyway, let's get down to serious business, because we have a really nice gentleman this morning who performs a real service for us here in our community and has a great history of service to us. So why don't you introduce the gentleman as he puts his headsets on so he finds out where he is.
Well, speaking of finding out where he is, now, being directionally impaired, that would be the hardest part of the job for me, is knowing where I was and how I got there.
Directionally impaired means that she doesn't know how to box the compass.
No.
She doesn't know north, east, south, and west.
That I do know, but
I bet you do.
Back in the early days, we used to before they had the county roads were identified with numbers.
Yes.
They were identified by things like Polecat Hill and things like that.
Lazy Row.
Yeah, right, Lazy Row, things of that nature. And so you kind of had to know the county pretty well back in those days. In fact, I can remember some times when we had to get actual directions. Going, well, you go past, you turn right on such and such road, go past the second barn, and then, and hope that both barns are still up. So,
I bet that's true.
You're right.
Our guest today is Steve Seltman, and he is the main man of LCPA. And that is the Logan County Paramedics Association, and thank God for them.
Thank you.
In what year was it that you became, other than the ambulance, now you are the Paramedics Association?
Before the days when they used to pass it around from the funeral homes.
Yes.
When an ambulance was needed.
That would have been prior to 1971, I believe. 1971 and prior would have been the nursing home or funeral homes, funeral homes. And then after that, I think it would run 71, 72 that the hospital engaged with the county to provide ambulance services.
This month it was Goff Funeral Home, the next month it was Sheets Funeral Home, and the third month it was Kerrigan. And that was the ambulance service. When they needed an ambulance, even in an accident, some major emergency, that's the rotation which they took those ambulance calls.
But they weren't staffed by professional people.
No, they were.
Insofar as they weren't paramedics.
Well, they didn't have paramedics didn't even exist.
They'd passed their first aid in scouting, but beyond that, as far as the technical training that we have today, which is very significant. Now, let's just address that very issue just a minute. We started out without a kudo, and I didn't think we needed a kudo because our kudos are going to be about the Golden County Paramedics Association and how important they are here to us in Golden County.
Yes.
When you hire on a new person, do you require some medical training in his past or her past, as the case may be?
Yes. We're licensed as a advanced life support ambulance service. Therefore, the state says that we must have a licensed paramedic, one at least, on every call. Now, in the past, we've always been able to have pretty much two on each rig, and we still are just about there. But it's getting harder and harder to find paramedics. medics are leaving the profession, and there's not as many going into the profession, so they're harder to find now. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that going well.
The odds are with somebody with that professional training background is probably already involved in that profession in one manner or another. Probably
many of them are
hospitals.
Yeah, many of them are,
and/or nursing homes.
Excuse me, but they have to have at least an EMT basic license to run with us, and we have quite a few, maybe 5 or 6 basics on our part-time list. And I think the trend we'll see more basics on with us as time goes on, unless the profession changes again, which I don't see a pattern for that yet.
Gender-wise, here at the Logan County, preponderance male. Do we have any female paramedics?
Yes,
we do.
We've been one of the forerunners for having females on the ambulance service, and that's been going on for well over 30 years. In the early years when we first started seeing females in the profession, we maybe had 1 or 2. Currently, we've got, I didn't count them before we sat down here, but I would say easily we have 8 to 10.
Really?
And 1, 2, 3, 4, I think three currently are full-time, and then the others are part-time. But yeah, we encourage female. There's really no difference. In fact, to be honest with you, there's many calls that females are a great advantage. You have a female issue, and it's good to have a female there because they're more empathetic on those issues and so forth. And females are just as good at medics as males are. There's no difference.
Well, when it comes to having to lift somebody who's a big person, you learn tricks, ways of doing this without ruining yourself, right?
True. Now, we have the fire department that helps us. They respond, all the different fire departments around the county respond with us, and we have their muscles and their know-how to go to get us going, get us started. The other thing is over the years, technology's changed. We used to have cots, so we had to physically pick them up from one position to another, but now they're electric. They have batteries in them, and they can raise and lower.
Position.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, this winter has been particularly tough on our highways and our drivers. Been very tough on EMTs. As you go, I have to go out and about in the county. It's bad enough in town, but you have to go on county roads that haven't had a chance to be plowed yet. That poses another problem for you.
It does from time to time, but again, I think the hardest thing for the medics or the fire department, whoever out there, is these automobile accidents that are outside in the weather, and getting a patient properly packaged in an ambulance quickly enough so that they don't get cold, and sometimes the medics are just freezing by the time they get in. It's part of the job. I mean,
Yeah, but it's tough.
It is. It can be a very, very difficult job, yes.
Now, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, we'll stop that.
I do that often.
Mrs. Busby?
Huh?
What's my name?
Bill.
Well, she passed half the test. Can you finish the name?
Oh, heck. So what's the difference between a paramedic and an EMT?
Training. All paramedics have to go through the basic training first. It's a 6-month process of mostly night training and a lot of homework. And then once they pass the state test, then they're usually qualified to go right into paramedic if they can get in. And classes sometimes have to wait for a year or so before they can get into a class.
Right?
Yes, and you have to go to either Springfield or Peoria or Bloomington or someplace like that to get that type of training.
Yeah, but that's interesting because you say you may have to wait a year until you can get into the training, and still there is a shortage.
There is, and I think I don't know all the reasons, but I think that the chief reason is because many medics find that that's what they got a heart for, but after they've been in for a little while, they go, you know what? With a little bit more schooling, I can go ahead and get an RN. I can work inside.
Yes.
I can get paid better. Paramedics, EMTs generally do not make high dollars. Now, they make a decent wage at the end of the year, but it's basically because they're in overtime all the time. These guys all work 56 hours a week, every week, regardless. Sometimes it's 72 hours.
Wow.
So in order to make a decent wage, you got to work a lot of hours. But same way with fire departments.
Now, do you have anything to do with the training of the people in the various fire departments?
Well, the fire departments all have EMT basics. Now, Lincoln Fire Department also has a few paramedics that work for them that they started out working in the ambulance service, and they found that they could make better wages working for the fire department, so they switched over whenever they got in. So we've lost a lot of medics to nursing, to fire departments, to some police departments. They're going to go where the money's at, and unfortunately, I'd like to say that medics make top wages. That's not true. It isn't so. They work hard for what they get, and the reimbursement for ambulance service is horrible.
Well, it's a rather responsible job.
Oh, not rather. It is a totally responsible job. I notice if you'll see, is there a regulation that when paramedics get a call, when your office gets a call from 911 or from wherever, that a fire department goes out on that call?
Yes, sir.
That is a regulation.
It is, yes. It is a regulation. They have to. Every call. It's particularly important in rural EMS because we're so far away from Lawndale and so far away from all these other outlying towns and homes. And so, so there's some places that from Lincoln it takes even at the fastest, you're looking at 12 minutes minimum to get there. Well, that's the reason why we have what they call first responders. All of those cities, all those towns have EMTs that respond. They're volunteers, most of them, and they respond first. And if they need oxygen or if they need to have CPR started or whatever, they get that done to begin the process. Otherwise, some patients would never make it if we didn't have first responders. So they're very, very important.
Now, are they paid staff or are they volunteers?
The fire departments, almost all are volunteers except for Lincoln Rural Fire Department and Lincoln City Fire Department. All the rest of them are volunteers.
The Mount Pulaski's and the New Hollands and the Wathams and all, they have their own volunteer system.
That is correct, yes.
But
kudos to all of them. Because, they have their profession, whatever they do to make money to live, but they also do that as a public service.
Yes, and that's really important to these small communities. Terribly important. The requirements for an EMT. Let's just take it. Let's say that Judith in her dotage decided that she wanted to become an EMT. Where does she start as far as technical training is concerned?
She can get a basic training at in a week. We have either Lincoln Rural or LCPA will have a class per year, and they usually run anywhere from 14 to 20 people. Once they get finished with that, if they want to go on, then they try to get enrolled in one of the other classes around in the surrounding area. And that, well, the paramedic portion of it would take a minimum of a year, usually a year and a half. So by the time they get done with all their training, it's usually about 2 years worth of classroom work.
Now, when you get a 911 call and have to head out, is there usually somebody who gets there just before you do?
Yes, that's where we call the first responders.
Your first responders. About how many do you figure you have in the county?
That I don't know, and it varies because some of the first responders have been with it for many, many years. They're getting older, and they're saying, you know what, I've had enough. Then there's new people that come on, but it's certainly not as strong as it used to be. But because I think the bedroom communities probably are a little smaller, and I don't know all the reasons, but I think it's harder and harder to fill these fire departments with volunteers. It's getting hard for them.
Well, the city of Lincoln isn't exactly having a growth spurt.
No.
Not so much.
The training starts when in classes, and you have to advance through the particular phases of the classwork.
Right.
Do physicians get involved in helping to train these candidates?
Generally not. However, I can tell you that the whole EMT, paramedic, all that field work is under the licensure of a physician. And so we belong to the Springfield Memorial Health Care System, and so they have a project medical director that is in charge, is responsible for everything that we do. In other words, he writes all the protocol, and and then we fulfill that protocol out in the field and so forth. If we make a mistake, we're answerable to him. If we do something that we're not supposed to do, we're answerable to that guy. And so he takes responsibility for our actions.
Now, you have a board as well, right?
Yes we
Now,
do.
what is their responsibility?
We meet once a month and go over financials and any kind of problems that we see or foresee. I'm on the board with them. There's 7 of us, and got a great board. They're dedicated to the betterment of the company, the betterment of our endeavor. So they're really good people. We've got a physician. We've got someone that was retired out of Caterpillar that was had a higher up job. We've got Norma Bathe. She's been involved in EMS all of her life. There's Don Peasley with Peasley Funeral Home. He's involved with. There's quite a few. Bob Thomas has been with us from the beginning. He's the coroner for the county. But all these guys are dedicated to come in and look at our situation and say, what needs to be done better, what can we do better, how are we doing financially, what we need to change, look up, so forth. So.
You talk about your finances. Do you most often have to deal with insurance companies rather than individuals?
Well, yeah. I mean, we bill the insurance companies, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, insurance companies, and we deal with that all the time. When I'm talking about money, we charge high rates, and it's very expensive on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have to remember that we're on a 50% reimbursement rate. So for every dollar we charge, we only get 50 cents back. And that isn't the case with insurance payers, but it is the case, with private payers, somebody who can't pay anything, or somebody that can pay a very small amount. You couple all that together into one net, and it comes out to about 50 cents on the dollar. So ultimately, And why do we charge such high rates? Well, because that's the only way that we can get our 50 cents.
Yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
It's kind of a funny way to run a business.
It is. It's really
Yeah,
weird.
yeah. Our guest this morning on Viewpoint is Mr. Steve Stiltman. Steve is a major domo at the Logan County Paramedics Association. Many people do not know where that is even physically located, Mr. Stiltman. Notwithstanding the fact you've been there a while, you do have some very decent quarters out there. It seems to me, I believe, Steve, that it's probably about as centrally located as you could get in the county, to get anywhere in the county at all.
It is.
In a reasonable response time. But let's just talk about your physical location, and then let's talk about the genesis of what we now know as Logan County Paramedics. It used to be the ambulance service, and as I said, it was passed around from month to month, from funeral home to funeral home. It might have been a design in that, who knows? In any event, 648-5510. Someone might have some questions, Mr. Steve Stiltman. Tell us where you're located, Steve.
We're located on Postville Drive, cattywampus across from the old Bonanza restaurant, and Lincoln Rural Fire Department is right next to us. And in fact, we use their personnel. We are contracted with Lincoln Rural to help us supplement our crews, because when we get 2, 3, 4, even 5 calls out at the same time, we have to begin to use Lincoln Rural to help us supplement our teams, because we can only staff 3 rigs around the clock. We can only afford to do that. So when we get into the 4th and 5th rigs, we start calling in off-duty medics and then using Lincoln Rural's EMT. So that works out pretty well. We answer over almost 5,000 calls a year. So
we know how deeply involved Dr. Gene Blum was in establishing what we now know as the Logan County Paramedics Association, to the point where he put his own money on the line to keep things going. Tell us how the Paramedics Association got started here in the county, Steve.
The hospital had discovered during the 90s that it was starting to put a financial burden on the hospital, so they finally decided to get out of the ambulance business. And so, because there's a county tax levy that helps subsidize the service, the county board had to make a decision about who they were going to have to run it. So they put it out for bids in the summer of 1999, and they made a final decision by September of 1999, so there was 3 bidders. One was Decatur Ambulance Service, one was an ambulance service out of Springfield, and the third one was the fledgling service called Logan County Paramedics Association, which basically was all the medics that worked for the hospital, for all intents and purposes. Dr. Blum had been our PM project medical director for years and was our mentor, and he took the torch and ran with it and helped us to get started. And in fact, he and I were the ones that looked for and found that piece of property that we purchased, and that used to be a Pontiac dealership, and then prior to that was a John Deere dealership, and we renovated it and moved in, I think, in 2003, I think it is, something like that.
Getting somebody out on a call today. This has been a tough winter for folks in the emergency business. Fire departments, a terrible time to fight. No time's a good time, but it's cold. It's been tough, physically demanding. What are your challenges as you go to a wreck on the highway? Besides the obvious thing of trying to use good sense and take it from there, but you have some major challenges as you go out there.
Sometimes people are pinned in a car, and the weather's bad, and time is of essence, and you have to rely on the fire departments and the police departments and everybody to pitch in and do whatever it takes to get that patient in the warm ambulance and get them started treatment, whatever they might need. But when it's cold, that's the issue, is getting them as quickly as we can in where it's warm. And that can be a task sometimes.
How many people, how many of the paramedics and EMTs does it take to man the ambulance when you leave the garage?
2. 1 to drive and 1 to be an attendant. And if we have a basic, the basic will be the driver, and the paramedic will be in the back. And if it's 2 paramedics, then they just swap back and forth between calls. If I have a partner, then I'm going to drive this call, and then the next time we go out, we'll switch. So that somebody isn't always driving or somebody isn't always treating.
You know, we just had an emergency call here a few minutes ago. One of our sponsors called and said, "How come you haven't mentioned me yet?" We're going to acknowledge our very important sponsors right now. Go ahead, Mr. Ash. And we're back live in the studio here this morning. WLCN 96.3, in case you didn't know what your frequency was. So to try that every day, not just Wednesdays. There's an exciting program on Sunday morning to 96.3. Old fellow thinks he knows something, plays old music, has a lot of fun doing it too. Our guest this morning at Viewpoint is Mr. Steve Siltman. Steve is the CEO, for want of a better word, Chief Executive Officer of the Logan County Paramedics Association, an organization about which we don't know a whole lot, but an organization which means everything to somebody who's in need of their services. They don't get the greatest pay scale in the world, folks. Just appreciate what they do for us. There's a lot of dedication going on out there. My young neighbor, former neighbor, Luke, Luscious Luke, I call him.
Yes.
Luke wanted to be a member of the paramedics, and by gosh, he is. And to my great surprise, and he seems to be enjoying it. Big fella, he can lift anybody. So
and a nice fellow.
Oh, very nice.
And that's so important. You know, when you're sick or hurt, you're already not in a very good frame of mind.
No.
And you don't need somebody crabby talking to you.
Well, that's part of it, though. I mean, you have to understand when you go into this business that people aren't feeling well, and sometimes they can be very crabby, but, you know, you just can't wear that around. You just got to do what you got to do to help folks out.
I had a chance to observe your Paramedics Association folks in action. A neighbor ours fell, broke a hip, which was a bad result. Anyway, she's quite elderly, and your folks came in there and did a yeoman's job, very quiet, very professional, very slow and steady. It was a good thing to watch, and I walked out of there feeling real good about what you folks do out there. It was the lady involved was upset, obviously, but she knew that she was in good hands.
You know, that brought something up. About 2 years ago, we decided that we were going to start sending out questionnaires to about 10% of our patients, recipients of ambulance service. And so we've been doing that. And interestingly enough, out of all of those, you know, thousands that we've sent out in the last 3 years or so, I think there's only been one that's you know, said something negative about it. Everybody that sends them back, almost nearly every one of them send back say, "Excellent, good, thank you. It's a good job." But I think the general public at large has pretty high regard for the medics.
Well, I just thought I thought your crew was very professional. There's an elderly lady who fell, as it turned out, broke a hip, and she was obviously concerned, but she was put at ease right away, mentally. So I just thought, boy, these boys do something besides go to Sunday school on Sunday mornings. They know what they're doing.
Yep, they do.
And I think when we changed to a professional group of paramedics from the people who were doing this out of the kindness of their heart, not that it was their profession. People thought it was such a shame that it took so long to get them in the ambulance, and that isn't the goal. It's to get them so stabilized, then you can go.
It just depends on the call. I mean, we have protocols specifically for if somebody is traumatized or if cardiacs, strokes, we want to move. Get them to the hospital as quickly as possible because time is of essence. But for the bulk of patients, time is not a big issue. An extra 5-10 minutes to taking your time, getting a good blood pressure, finding out what's going on, getting a history, and doing the treatment is much more important than hurrying around and jumping in the ambulance and whatever. We just generally don't do that unless we're forced into it.
Mr. Siltman, you have a patient in the ambulance who a little iffy as far as stabilization and so forth, and somebody must make a decision, maybe we ought to go to Springfield. Who calls that decision in your ambulance?
Well, both the medics and the emergency department nurse and or doctor. We have contact with them on all calls. And if we run an EKG and we find that there's no question that this is what they call an acute MI or a heart attack that happened just within a few minutes, then time is of essence because they need to go to a cath lab in Springfield where they can bust the clot out with a catheter, and that has saved a multitude of lives. It saved some lives. I'll tell you what it's really done is it's improved the quality of many people's lives because they weren't debilitated. Some of these people will have an MI, get them down to Springfield, they bust the clot out. Inside of a week, they're out golfing again. Well, that was unheard of 20 years ago or better.
Sure. Now, one of the things that we experience in your profession, unfortunately, drug overdoses. What kind of a percentage of, or do you have a lot of that? Let's just generalize it instead of get more specific. Do you have a lot of the drug overdose calls?
Quite a few.
Is that interesting?
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's a nationwide issue. It's not just Logan County. It's everywhere. Drugs have become, and prescription drugs as well as illicit drugs, buying off the market. They're both sometimes abused, so yeah, it's common, very common. Yeah.
How are you viewing the legalization of marijuana? Do you think that's going to up your business at all, or not so much?
I have no idea of knowing that. Alcohol.
That's a drug.
Is a drug too, and it's been around forever.
And it's legal, and I've heard that argument used that marijuana isn't any worse than alcohol. But I didn't know that was our goal. To avoid worseness.
I don't know. I'm going to.
There's a word I want to call worseness.
I tend to withhold my personal feelings about all that kind of stuff, but all I know is that somebody who drinks too much or uses drugs too much or uses those kinds of things, whether it's just let's just say marijuana, those individuals have a propensity to try something more, and I think there's something to be said for you start something, where you're going to end up at. Some people are satisfied with toking a weed every once in a while, but there are other people who get hooked on that stuff, and then they want more, and then that's where you get into all these other things. So I don't know.
The use of medical cannabis is a pretty deep subject and something I have no knowledge of at all, happily. But there are those, and who's going to argue with them, who will tell you, look in the eye and say how much cannabis helps them physically. Who's to argue with that?
That's a good point. Who's to argue with it?
Our son Greg, whom you may know, retired from the Department of Corrections as a warden. We were very proud of him for that accomplishment. And promptly entered another job where he's making more money than his dad ever made. He's managing a medical marijuana distribution store up in Canton. The sales are incredible.
Oh, I bet.
They're just incredible. And people drive from all over heck and back to get there because they are bound determined that this product helps them with whatever their particular physical ailment is.
I have no problem with that whatsoever. I think that's wonderful. If there's a drug that helps, great.
Go for it, huh? Do you have any idea what it costs to purchase and outfit one of your ambulances? It's got to be phenomenal.
It is. It is. The equipment that we keep in each one of the ambulances, for one ambulance, we're looking at $100,000 worth of equipment. And the vehicles themselves, when we buy them new, range anywhere from $160,000 to $210,000, depending on whether it's a remount or whether it's a brand new one or whatever. But they're very expensive, yes. So you're looking at a minimum of $250,000 rolling down the road. Now we got 5 of them, so figure it out what we have in
well,
equipment.
That kind of points to the reason that you can't go out for $20 a call, can you?
No, those days are long gone.
Plus, you've got 2 people on that ambulance that are going out. Plus, you have to pay the people who are back at the garage running the place.
Yes.
So it's going to cost you more than $20.
Yeah, it costs the company $1.3 million a year in order to keep the doors open.
Oofta.
I had an experience of riding in the Springfield ambulance emergency last year, and it's a wonder my heart condition didn't get worse because I was laying there thinking, my God, this is going to be an expensive ride.
Yeah. Oh, I said that wrong. It's not 1.3. It was $2.3 million a year for operation budget. So
that's a lot of heavy money.
It's a lot of money.
Does the county subsidize you in any way? Does the hospital subsidize you in any way?
The taxpayers, out of their property taxes, pay a little bit into it, and so it generates roughly $280,000 per year, and that goes to the ambulance to subsidize for its losses.
How about the fire departments?
Fire departments and police departments are full paid departments are all fully funded by tax dollar. They have no way of generating money like an ambulance service does, so it's a different animal. They're fully tax subsidized. Fire departments and police departments they cost the taxpayers quite a bit of money, and whereas the ambulance service is not really very expensive to the taxpayers, but it does help us to keep the doors open.
Now, are you notified of a fire call?
Yes, sir.
You are there.
We stand by for them on structure fires because a lot of times they'll get smoke inhalation or they'll get overheated or whatever, and we like to be there for them. But we don't charge the fire department for that.
That's a quid pro quo, huh?
Yep. We scratch each other's backs.
That surprised you?
So how many years have you been in this?
Surprised you? She came out of the quid pro quo.
45 years.
Bless your heart. What were you, 4 when you started?
I was 21, so figure it out. Yeah, I'll be 65 next month.
You're not going to retire, are you?
I'm going to retire, I think, in about a year and a half.
Are you?
Yeah, I think so.
I think you've earned that right. The big problem is we have to keep honing somebody who can step into the shoes.
Well,
that's going to be tough.
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I'm not the brightest crayon in the box, and I'm sure that somebody will be able to come in there and do a bang-up job. I'm certain of it. I'm just certain of it.
You may not be the brightest, but you're the sharpest.
There you go.
I'd rather have sharpness than brightness.
My dad used to tell me, just because your head comes to a point doesn't mean you're sharp, boy.
Fathers had a cute way of telling us things, didn't they?
I think Judy can share with us Kenneth's remonstration with her one day.
Oh, which one is that?
Don't let people wonder.
Oh, yeah, don't let people think you're stupid, Jude. Open your mouth and prove it.
Oh, boy.
But you had to know him to
brings
appreciate
back,
that.
ooh, yeah.
You've been in charge of our Paramedics Association how long now, Mr. Siltman?
Well, we started in 1999, so since then, but prior to that, I was the a department manager at the hospital since 1988, so that, I don't know how many years that is, it's a long time, well, probably 30 years, probably a good 30 years I've been in charge, with the exception of about a year and a half or something like that.
Go out of training.
Well, you ought to be almost a doctor by now.
Well, no.
Are you asking for an appointment after hours?
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Are there any... Go ahead, Judith, please.
No, please.
There'll be a few minutes of silence on dead air now while we decide.
Yeah.
You go right ahead, dear.
Ooh. Yeah, we better.
I just looked at the clock. We ran out of time. I'm sorry about that. Your questions have been preempted by the clock. Steve Siltman runs the show out here at Logan County Paramedics. We appreciate the time, and we appreciate the dedication and the service your entire staff shows, Mr. Siltman.
Thank you, sir.
We're lucky to have the staff that we do out there and the equipment. Thank you very, very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're done.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.